Mic check 1 2. Welcome. Today we're not going to start with headlines and go into more specific stories. Today we're going to talk about Hasan Piker. Hello. Because Pillow and I are in conversation with him. We're in conversation about him, and I think that a bad empanada has a great video on this and we can watch it together. And oh shit, it's 35 minutes. Okay, we'll watch the 8-minute one.
Campaign lately against Graham.
But you were about to provide examples for Hasan falling into a conservative mindset, Pillow?
Platner, the new kid on the block, like entryist Democrat in Maine, who's been getting a lot of favorable coverage by very stupid people who don't really care if you massacre Iraqis and Afghans on the other side of the world, as long as you say the same stuff that Fetterman did when he was running for election. They'll gladly vote for you, and they will especially yell at anyone who's like, maybe
Comparing him to Fetterman is tough.
this guy isn't someone who should be being supported by anyone who is remotely anti-imperialist or who cares about a single person.
So we're talking about Hasan Piker and his support for Graham Platner, but mostly just Hasan. Graham Platner will be catching tremendous strays during this
Outside the
conversation.
United States of America, because he did 5 tours. Sorry.
We got a
4 tours
Snapple.
of Afghanistan and Iraq, and then he did another tour as a PMC. And it actually came out after I made my last video on him, because this is my 3rd video on this guy in the last 3 weeks. In the last video that I made, I had not figured this out, and this is icing on the shit cake, okay? Like, this is not a reason to hate this guy, it's just more reason to hate this guy, because the 4 tours of Iraq and Afghanistan as a machine gunner, that was already bad enough. And then he's like ridiculous contradictory statements saying that, like, you know, he was against the Iraq war, but for some reason he still signed up to go and do it anyway. Stuff like that. Americans hate the cops, you know, fuck the police, but then signing up to go and police third worlders and kill them, now that's okay, there's nothing wrong with that because it's far away from you, I suppose. But something has come out about him in the time since my last video on him around a week ago. Or maybe it hasn't come out, rather I found out about it, but I'm the center of the world. So really, is something really like existing if I don't know about it yet? Honestly, no. No, it doesn't. I'm the only one who matters. So yeah, that's all there is to it. It turns out that Graham Platner made a campaign contribution to, I don't know, some Democratic primary candidate in 2018. He donated $1,000, and as a result of having to donate $1,000, he had to disclose like personal details, like, you know, zip code, where he lives, but also his occupation and his employer. And 2018 is precisely the year in which we already know that he was a PMC in Afghanistan. So what company was
Private military
Platner working
contractor.
for? Well, have you ever heard of Blackwater? You know, Blackwater, the guys who like infamously just like constantly massacred people so much during the Iraq war that they had to change their name numerous times. So he misspelled the name of the company here hilariously on his declaration. So the company now, Blackwater, isn't actually called Blackwater.
What?
They've changed their name and rebranded, but they're presently called Constellus, and they renamed it in 2014, I believe, from Blackwater to Constellus. That means that Graham Platner declared in 2018 that he was a security employee for Constellus, which aligns with the time that we already know he was a PMC in Afghanistan by his own admission.
Graham Platner, a military veteran, oysterman, and harbor master, has just...
Man, the mainstream media loves this fella. That should be ringing alarm bells for you guys. Those of you who are like, this is an insurgent, non-mainstream Dem candidate, he's going to oppose genocide and all that. The beginning of his ad, one of his recent campaign ads, which is highly produced, by the way, if you can't see this guy for what he is, then I don't even know what to tell you. I did 4 infantry tours in the Marine Corps and the Army. I'm not afraid to name an enemy, and the enemy is the oligarch. It's the billionaires who pay for it and the politicians who sell us out. So Graham Platner's website has an interesting policy position, which even aside from...
One of Bad Empanada's golden rules is that if you start your bio bragging about your military exploits, you might be a fascist.
You know, the obviously disqualifying shit, like willingly signing up to go to Iraq and Afghanistan 4 times and then joining Blackwater in 2018 so that you can go back and kill more fucking brown people for the Empire because you just loved it so much the other 4 times that you did it. Fucking Blackwater. He also has an interesting policy position on his website. Platner outright says on his website that he is going to work tirelessly to rebuild the American military. Take on wasting...
Get fucked. I did not know that about him. Oh, fuck. Rebuild the greatest military in the world. Rebuild the largest standing army in human history. What? Rebuild What, a navy that has 10 to 12 fucking aircraft carriers? What are we talking about? Rebuild the army that has nuclear fucking submarines parked around every major superpower? Fuck this guy. Yes, so mainly with Israel and Palestine, Hasan has kind of fallen into the blame the whole group mindset. So with Israeli people or people who used to live in Israel, he kind of instantly assumes they are going to be a Zionist, even if they are talking about something completely different. Now sometimes he does catch himself. This blame the whole group mindset it's anti-Semitism. Let's be real. I mean, 80-something% of Israelis think there are no innocents in Gaza. That's not 100%. So you can't say just because you live in Israel that you are a Zionist. I mean, it's possible to be a Zionist and not know you're a Zionist just by participating in an ethno-state. But, like, when it comes to people who were murdered on October 7th, they're still civilians. You know, there are conscious objectors to the entire invasion of Gaza. But the blame the whole group when it comes to what? Like, the Israeli people who live in Israel assume they're all going to be Zionists? Well, it's not helpful to call everyone in Israel Zionist, because it's like calling all drugs drugs. You know, it's a pretty useless term when there's a diversity of problems in Israel. And just blanket calling them Zionists is what anti-Semites do. So if you're a content creator, that's just bad business. That doesn't mean you're wrong. But you can't go around on social media where the one thing someone might see of you in passing is you calling all Israelis Zionists, which is what anti-Semites do. Not a good look. What did you get into? You were a stinky dog. Oh my god. Oh. Bro. Hot down. Oh shit. Out. Out of my room. Out. Out. Stinky dog. No way. Off. Come here. Ow. Holy shit, what the fuck? My folks came back with the dog, and bro, whatever they did, they completely undid his grooming. That dog, you could put your face in that dog's fur. He was so fresh. And then they go on one walk, and it's like, what did they let him get into? Jesus. Anyway. The lighting is fixed. I'm sure that was terrible if you have headphones with me whistling into the microphone, but anyway. But yeah, like, David Pakman used to say that he would delete anyone using the term Zionist from his chat. And while he probably did purge a lot of anti-Semites, he probably deleted a lot of reasonable criticism as well. I forget what it was exactly, but a while ago he was watching an interview, and the interviewer was asking the first few like background questions, like where are you from, etc. And the guy said, well, I lived in Connecticut since I was a kid, but I'm from Israel. And you could see Hasan visibly do a grossed out face and wince. I mean, that is cringe. Like, we still don't know where you're from, dude. That ties into, like, the weird, indigenous, relationship that Israelis have with historic Palestine. The Hasan stuff is all on the line, which is why I'm like, you, not like he is a horrible person, if you get what I mean. I mean, if you're grossed out by Israel in general, like, we have to know what you mean by that. Like, it's totally understandable. Israel has invited every criticism, including the ones that look like anti-Semitism. But the Hasan stuff is all on the line, which is, like, on the show, the line? Oh. I mean, like, the stuff that somebody pointed out about him is, like, bad, but not, like, him horribly disgusting, if you get what I mean. Yeah. We don't have to write off Hasan when his effective output has been overwhelmingly positive, you know?
Pentagon, rebuild American shipping.
The problem is with Graham Platner. You know? Whether we make mistakes by supporting the wrong people, that's water under the bridge, you know? Like, and when it comes to criticizing Israel, fuck Israel. Like, they've invited every single kind of criticism under the sun. And if that resembles anti-Semitism, well, I'm sorry, but you have made this bed. You have created this environment where anti-Semites are kicking their feet in the air, watching this on their iPads.
His complaints, there is massive waste in procurement. There is a revolving door between the Pentagon and massive defense contractors. There's widespread consolidation encouraged by deliberate government policy to the point where competition has virtually disappeared in many vital areas.
You had another thing? About Hasan? Because this is the political commentary portion of the whole stream, so we'll just do headlines and do a lot of listening for the rest of the stream. But you have my full attention at this point. I'll get some nicotine gum here. Get some background music. Oh. Other thing the person pointed out that made me go, oh shit, he definitely does do that, is with women around him. Whenever one of his friends is like, no guys, Hasan is amazing, etc., they get backlash about his politics and things he said in the past. And Hasan will come out and say, no guys, it's okay, this person isn't a political person. Hasan is like socially weird. That is my hot take. He can't take criticism, like, but he does that with guy friends, not his women friends. So he'll say like, oh, like my bro is not a political person. He's like not in not into that. But when it's a woman, what, like Maya, and he won't come to their defense? Wow. Why is that? But I think that's the wrong way to go about it in general with his male friends. You don't say this isn't a political person. That's basically saying, hey, this person's unserious. He's a little baby. He doesn't understand the politics. Be like, hey, that's my friend. And I'm friends with people who aren't as informed as I am, but you know what? I mean, is that still saying the same thing? You don't lead with, they don't understand. You lead with, this person is my friend. That's why I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. I know that they're a good person. So when they say something mildly fucked up, it's not a big deal. This isn't my first impression of them. My only way to steelman this behavior is like, maybe he has some kind of unspoken individual rules of privacy that he has with individuals who happen to be women in his friend group. But I mean, he just does so much talking. It would be hard to see that be overlooked, I would assume. Hasan's also the type of person, I feel like, he'll also explain something political to guy friends, but not to his women friends unless they reach out and specifically asks. Okay. Sorry, my brother came in to talk to me. That's cool. Like, will he explain political things to his women friends, like, on stream? Because he's literally had Maya sitting next to him. And I think I watched her most recent appearance on the show. And I think I can't remember if they did anything political. I think it was all just like pop culture stuff. But here's the thing. None of these criticisms will ever make a dent because they tend to get swept under the rug with the waves of bullshit criticism that needs to get swept under the rug every single day. Like, how can we have a conversation seriously about the minutiae of political discourse, you know, between the, you know, talking with his male friends versus his female friends, when we've got people freaking out about his dog collar, dude. The shot collar. Like, there's no room for reasonable criticism. I was watching the video of him looking at the Google Trends, and I'm like, oh, people, like, the mainstream discourse on Hasan is batshit. Yeah, the dog collar stuff. I would prefer somebody else in the face of leftism on the internet, but yeah. Dude, I wish we had someone who would talk about, like, socialist values for 8 hours a day without also having his mouth full of food. But that's just my personal preference. That's my deal breaker, but to each his own. Oh, man. But that's the thing. When you're not viewed as a threat, you get propped up as controlled opposition or cute opposition. I think controlled opposition is the way of the old world, kind of, and the new world is kind of like cute opposition, where you pat the opposition on the head for being cute, and then they just keep doing what they're doing because, I don't know, you've got some articles written about you now, you know?
This is the legacy of several decades of disastrous mismanagement and profiteering at the highest level.
Alright, Bad and Banana doesn't like it when people watch his videos or react to them, especially not with me, like, in front of his face. But hey, Hasan, as the leftist on the internet, is light years better than Destiny being the liberal. Yeah. That is a far more accurate title. Dude, Destiny, that whole, what is it, the DGG world is just a wasteland of centrism. And, like, it is a wasteland of centrism filled with chasms that lead to right-wing pipelines. That's Destiny. Alright. Let's go into headlines and then I'll go into more specific stories. If you have anything else, let me know.
Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Israel's continuing its deadly attacks in Gaza, despite the U.S.
Hell, I'd take somebody with right-wing pipeline over sex pestiny. Dude, yeah, I would literally rather listen to, like, Leafly or Tom Dark or something over Destiny.
Brokered ceasefire. Al Jazeera is reporting hospitals in Gaza received 13 bodies over the past day that Palestinians say they've seen no real change in their lives since the ceasefire. The Nasser Medical Complex in Khan Yunis is reporting Israel's handed over 30 bodies and remains of slain Palestinians. Hamas has handed over the bodies of 15 Israeli hostages as part of the ceasefire deal. On Wednesday, a funeral was held for 54 unidentified Palestinians returned by Israel. It comes as the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, says the amount of aid currently entering Gaza is a, quote, drop in the ocean of what's urgently needed. Here's Abir Ati.
Underage sexting, partner? Get the fuck out of here with that. Bro. Is that really how we tried to gaslight his audience? It's role play. Ugh. Oh my god. What the fuck? I'm not a pedophile, they're just my underage fuck buddy. You know what I mean? Jesus Christ.
Of the World Food Program.
Since the ceasefire started on the 11th of October, we've now have over 530 trucks into Gaza supporting bakeries, nutrition programs, general food distributions. So far, we've had over 6,700 tons of food. That's enough for close to 500,000 people for 2 weeks.
500,000 people for 2 weeks. Aren't there like 6 million people in Gaza? Oh. 2.1 million people. So, 500,000 for 2 weeks. It's still like insane scarcity. That's still, if people are buying that food, it's a markup of 150%. Probably 200%.
Daily deliveries continue, and they are now averaging around 750 tons. That's much better than what we had before the ceasefire, but it's still.
Before the ceasefire, it was famine. People dying of starvation. What are we talking about?
Our target, which is around 2,000 tons every day.
The Palestinian Prisoners Society says Israeli forces have detained 45 people, including a child, in raids.
It's not going to be enough unless Israel opens the Rafah border and the Egyptian crossing.
Since last night in the occupied West Bank. The group describes Israeli forces have vandalized homes and repeatedly assaulted detainees and their relatives. It comes as the UN Human Rights Office in the occupied Palestinian territory is warning about an alarming rise in Israeli settler violence against Palestinians as the olive harvest season gets underway. So far this year, there were over 750 Israeli settler attacks on Palestinians, which is a 13% increase from last year. On Tuesday, a panel of judges from the Philadelphia-based Third Circuit Court of Appeals appeared skeptical of the Trump administration's attempt to rearrest and deport Palestinian activist Mahmoud Khalil. The Columbia University graduate was the first pro-Palestinian campus protester to be jailed by the Trump administration over his advocacy work. Khalil's lawyers have filed appeals to prevent the Trump administration from detaining him again. Yesterday, Khalil spoke to supporters outside the federal court.
I have anything like this shows how my case is actually just like a test for everyone's rights here across the country.
I'm going to take my meds.
The federal government shutdown has entered its 22nd day. Earlier this week, the federal judiciary ran out of funding to...
Longest shutdown in American history, if I understand correctly. It's just a good... It's just inherently a good photo of the White House. Yeah, I tried to crop out the logo, but I couldn't. Alright, I'll be back.
To support the work of nearly 30,000 staffers and 94 district courts. Some of these courts are furloughing staff for the first time in 30 years. It comes as several states are warning they'll be forced to suspend supplemental nutrition assistance program, that's SNAP benefits, by November 1st if the shutdown continues, impacting an estimated 42 million people nationwide. Meanwhile, at a White House Rose Garden lunch for Republican senators yesterday, President Trump unveiled a new nickname for Russ Vought, the White House budget chief, who's been spearheading cuts to programs nationwide amidst the shutdown.
And I will say this, that we have Darth Vader. You know Darth Vader, right? Darth Vader is a man who, I think he's sitting right. Is that Darth? Stand up, please, Darth Vader. Stand up. Does everybody know? They call him Darth Vader. I call him a fine man. But he's cutting Democrat priorities, and they're never going to get him back.
A January 6th rioter who was pardoned by President Trump has been rearrested for allegedly threatening to assassinate House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries. Christopher Moynihan reportedly sent text to an unidentified recipient, including, quote, Hakeem Jeffries makes a speech in a few days in NYC. I cannot allow this terrorist to live. And, quote, I will kill him for the future, unquote. Moynihan is among the 1,500 people who participated in the January 6 riots, who were later granted clemency by Trump when he returned to office. In a highly unusual move, President Trump's demanding the Justice Department pay him about $230 million in compensation for the federal probes against him. Many of the senior DOJ officials who would be needed to approve such a payout previously worked for Trump, including the Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, his former private attorney. The White House said they would, quote, follow the guidance of career ethics officials. But Attorney General Pam Bondi fired the agency's top ethics advisor in July.
You know, Trump pardoning January 6 rioters doesn't really surprise me, but what will really be insane is when he starts pardoning people multiple times. Can you do that? I don't know. The Trump presidency is proving that a lot of rules are kind of flexible, huh? Like getting permits to start demolition on the White House. Just illegally demoing the fucking White House, dude. That's insane. Trump just had an excavator show up and start tearing down walls.
Arizona Attorney General Chris Mays is suing Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson for refusing to swear in Representative-elect Adelita Grijalva. In the filing, Mays wrote, quote, constitutional rights cannot be used as a bargaining chip, unquote. Mays is asking the court to force Speaker Johnson to swear in Grijalva or designate someone else to do it. By refusing to seat her, Speaker Johnson is depriving 813,000 residents living in Arizona's 7th District of congressional representation. Grijalva says she believes Speaker Johnson's refusing to swear her in to Congress because she would be the final vote on a discharge petition to release the Epstein files.
Wow, dude. This is getting out of hand, man.
More on that after headlines. President Trump's nominee to lead the Office of Special Counsel, Paul Ingrassia, withdrew from consideration Tuesday following...
Sorry, my husky needed to play for a few minutes or he would have started to run on the ceiling. No, I get you. Those huskies need a lot of stimulation. Like the corgi. Where's the corgi? Oh, he's down there looking sad because we're not literally playing the ball right now. But we will. You just went on a big walk. Are you tired?
Widespread backlash over a slew of racist and anti-Semitic texts. Ingrassia texted a group of Republicans that he has a, quote, Nazi streak, adding that the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday should be, quote, tossed into the 7th circle of hell, unquote. After the texts were made public by Politico Monday, several Republican senators say they would not support his nomination, including Senate Majority Leader John Thune. As immigration raids ramp up across the country, ICE agents in Los Angeles shot and wounded 2 people in a botched operation Tuesday. The agents reportedly shot an immigrant from Mexico they were attempting to arrest. A bullet then ricocheted and wounded a U.S. Marshal. The person ICE targeted has been identified as Carlitos Ricardo Parias, who is a popular TikTok streamer with over 100,000 followers and often documents ICE raids. He now faces criminal charges. Here in New York.
Wait, what?
Dozens of federal agents, many of them with face coverings, flooded Lower Manhattan charges. Streamer ICE targeted has been identified as Carlitos Ricardo Parias, who is a U.S. Marshal. The person ICE targeted has been identified as Carlitos Ricardo Parias.
Carlitos Ricardo. Let's go to TikTok real quick. Why don't I have TikTok on here, man? Oops. Look up. There he is.
TikTokero mexicano.
Sorry, sir, you got me. Sorry, sir, you got me. Sir, you need to leave.
TikTokero mexicano.
Who is a popular TikTok streamer with over 100,000 followers and often documents ICE raids. He now faces criminal charges. Here in New York, dozens of federal agents, many of them with face coverings, flooded lower Manhattan Tuesday afternoon as they targeted immigrant street vendors, most of them from Africa. As news spread of the raid, several people took to the streets in protest. An expose by the Washington Post has revealed Secretary of State Marco Rubio agreed to return 9 leaders of the MS-13 gang in U.S. custody to El Salvador in exchange for President Nayib Bukele's government to allow the U.S. deport and detain hundreds of immigrants at the Secut mega prison complex. Some of the people Rubio promised to return were U.S. government informants who were under the protection of the Justice Department. Bukele's request came amidst mounting reports of secret deals between his government and MS-13. UN experts say U.S. strikes against Venezuela in international waters amount to extrajudicial executions. It comes amidst new reporting that the CIA is...
Back again, my laptop decided to die 1 second after I sent that message. Oh, I was just...
...a central role in collecting and sharing the bulk of the intelligence used by the Trump administration to carry out its deadly extrajudicial military strikes in the Caribbean. That's according to reports from The Guardian, which spoke to sources close to the operations who said the CIA is providing real-time information collected by satellites and signal intercepts to target boats they believe are carrying drugs. CIA agents then make the recommendation to strike the vessels with missiles. The U.S. has blown up at least 7 boats in the region, killing over 24 people without providing evidence that the vessels are in fact used for drug trafficking. Meanwhile, President Trump's continued his attacks on Colombia and Venezuela. This is Venezuelan Defense Minister Vladimir Pedrino.
Colombia must know it can count on the Bolivarian National Armed Forces. The people of Colombia must know that they have on their side moral and physical support and deployment of our force in our territory to defend against all threats that loom over the border.
Russian airstrikes killed 7 people, including 2 children in Ukraine today. It comes as President Trump announced his upcoming summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Budapest has been canceled, telling reporters he did not want to, quote, have a wasted meeting. Both Trump and European leaders are calling on Russia to accept a ceasefire along the current front lines. So far, the Kremlin has rejected those calls. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says it isn't surprising Russia's refused to negotiate.
Instead, Russia is once again doing anything to avoid diplomacy. And as soon as the question of long-range weapons for us, for Ukraine, moved away, Russia almost automatically became less interested in diplomacy.
Former French President Nicolas Sarkozy turned himself in to prison authorities on Tuesday to begin serving a 5-year sentence. Last month, he was found...
Ooh. Take a seat in that holding cell, chump.
Found guilty of criminal conspiracy for illegally receiving millions of euros from the late Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi to fund his 2007 campaign. Sarkozy is the first former French head of state in the modern era to be convicted of a crime. In Colombia, an appeals court has overturned the conviction of former president and U.S. ally Álvaro Uribe for witness tampering and bribery. Uribe had been sentenced to 12 years of house arrest for allegedly bribing imprisoned members of paramilitary groups to retract damaging testimony exposing Uribe's ties to right-wing U.S.-backed paramilitary groups. Uribe ruled Colombia from 2002 to 2010, during which time there were thousands of extrajudicial killings of civilians who were then purposely mislabeled as rebel fighters in what became known as the false positive scandal. We'll talk more about this later in the broadcast. An indigenous indigenous leaders from across Latin America have embarked on a flotilla from the banks of the Napo River in Coca, Ecuador, as they sail to Belém, Brazil, for the UN Climate Summit set to begin next month. Members of the Yakumama Amazon flotilla are demanding an end to fossil fuels, protections for indigenous territories and ecosystems from oil, mining, and industrial agriculture, and a ban on fossil fuel extraction in the Amazon rainforest. Democracy Now! Will be in Belém, broadcasting from the COP30. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined by Democracy Now!'s Juan Gonzalez. Arizona Attorney General Chris Mays is suing Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson for refusing to swear in Representative-elect Adelita Grijalva, who was elected a month ago in a special election to represent more than 800,000 people of the greater Tucson area. Grijalva says she believes Speaker Johnson is refusing to seat her because she would be the final vote necessary on a discharge petition to release unclassified records about convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Last week, the House Oversight Committee released a new set of Epstein documents, including call logs that included someone listed as Donald Trump. As all of this unfolded Tuesday, an explosive memoir was released by Jeffrey Epstein's survivor, the late Virginia Roberts Giuffre, titled Nobody's Girl, a memoir of surviving abuse and fighting for justice. Virginia was the first survivor to come out publicly against Epstein. In the book, she details how...
You don't lurk for the rest of the stream? Maybe take a nap? Right on. Take care. But by the way, this is the memoir that made Prince Andrew give up his royal title. She mysteriously died of suicide during some court proceedings that were happening. Not in the courtroom, I mean like during the same time. Very strange timing.
How he groomed her along with his co-conspirator, Ghislaine Maxwell, who met Virginia.
I believe she otherwise would have testified, but I don't know.
While she worked at Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort. Maxwell is currently serving a 20-year sentence for sex trafficking. Giuffre writes, quote, "In my years with them, they let me out to scores of wealthy, powerful people. I was habitually used and humiliated, and in some instances, choked, beaten, and bloodied. I believed I might die as a sex slave," she said. Virginia also details how she was forced to have sex with Prince Andrew 3 times, beginning when she was 17. Virginia also said she was beaten and raped by a well-known prime minister. Virginia Giuffre died reportedly by suicide earlier this year in Australia at age 41. Nobody's Girl was completed just before she died. In the book's foreword, her collaborator, Amy Wallace, describes an email from Virginia shortly before she died that read in part, quote, "The content of this book is crucial as it aims to shed light on the systemic failures that allow the trafficking of vulnerable individuals across borders. It's imperative that the truth is understood and that the issues surrounding this topic are addressed both for the sake of justice and awareness. In the event of my passing, I would like to ensure that Nobody's Girl is still released," she said. For more, we're joined here in our New York studio by Amy Wallace, the ghostwriter of Virginia Roberts Giuffre's posthumously published memoir this week, Nobody's Girl, a memoir of surviving abuse and fighting for justice.
Wow, I was
Amy
wondering
Wallace's
who that
op-ed
was.
in Sunday's New York Times is headlined, "Why Virginia Roberts Giuffre Would Not Stop Talking About Jeffrey Epstein." We welcome you to Democracy Now! This book is utterly painful. The cover, a photograph of a young Virginia disappearing, fading. If you can start off by talking about this horror that she underwent that is rocking both Britain right now and the United States and the U.S., it may well be why Congress has not resumed working. And of course, right now you have the situation just before the 2 of your book was released. Prince Andrew has voluntarily given up his titles because of what's being released in this book. Why don't you start off by
This blocking of the files is not sustainable. You cannot stop the truth. You cannot stop it with all the world's powers, the military. It doesn't matter how many fishing boats you blow up. We will not keep asking.
Talking about how Virginia Giuffre came to work at Mar-a-Lago as an underage young woman, and then ultimately was trafficked by both Maxwell and Epstein.
Yeah, well, she was 16 years old. She was working a summer job at Mar-a-Lago.
We will not keep asking. We will not stop asking.
She was working in the spa, so there was a particular section of the hotel that she worked in. Her father worked at Mar-a-Lago as a maintenance man, and he helped her get the job.
A man who abused her as well.
A man who abused her as well, which she reveals in this book for the first time. And we can talk about that more. But yeah, she was about a couple weeks into the job, but she loved working there. It was a beautiful place. She felt really privileged to be there. And a posh British woman walks in with an amazing outfit and very attractive. I think Virginia writes that her handbag cost more than my dad's truck. There was a class issue here, clearly. And the woman sees her reading an anatomy book and says, "Oh, are you interested in massage?" And Virginia says, "Well, I don't really know much about it, but I'm so inspired by this spa. I would love to learn." And she is asked to then go that day to Epstein's house. She goes because a woman has asked her, and she thinks it's going to be safe. And that very day, hours later, Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein sexually abused her for the first time, and at that point, she was in the net.
And how did she go from Mar-a-Lago to then being close to and in the circle of Epstein?
Well, I think, there were different victims that were treated differently. There were some girls that went one time to the house in Palm Beach and then were never seen again. And then there were other girls who were in the sort of inside circle. And Virginia lived very close by. When she first met him, she lived in Loxahatchee, which...
Never seen again. What the fuck?
And then were never seen. There were some girls that went one time to the house in Palm Beach and then were never seen again. And then there were other girls who were in the sort of inside circle. And Virginia lived very close by when she first...
Oh, like they went off. Okay. I was gonna say, did they Jamal Khashoggi them? Oh my god.
Met him. She lived in Loxahatchee, which is a sort of more rural...
I wouldn't put it past them, but holy shit.
Poorer area. She lived with...
The only reason why we know about this now is because there are survivors.
Their parents in a trailer in the back, and he liked her. I think that he could spot. He and Ghislaine both were very...
They lived in a trailer behind...
Poorer area. She lived with her parents in a trailer in the back. Earl, very close by. When she first met him, she lived in Loxahatchee, which is a sort of more rural, poorer area. She lived with her parents in a trailer in the back, and he liked her. I think that he could spot. He and Ghislaine both were very good at sniffing out girls who had already been abused and who were more vulnerable to being manipulated, and so he quickly absorbed her into his world. Told her to quit her job at Mar-a-Lago. He would rent her an apartment. He didn't want her living with her parents anymore because he wanted her to come and go at all hours. He didn't want her parents to be suspicious. So very quickly she gets pulled in, and then they say, you don't have a passport. We need to get you one of those. And Ghislaine Maxwell helps her fill out the application, and then they take her to London. That's really one of her first major trips. Certainly, she'd never been abroad before. They take her to London, and that's where she's first trafficked to Prince Andrew. She had already been by that point trafficked to other friends of Epstein and Maxwell. So it was a pretty quick sort of itinerary on her going into the depths of hell. She quickly becomes one of their people that travels with them all over the world.
Now, in the book, she does not name many of those who she says sexually assaulted her, but you know all of them because you fact-checked them. Is there anything you have to say about that, or the reason those names were not disclosed?
Yeah, I think Virginia is pretty eloquent about this in the book, but any survivor of sexual abuse understands that coming forward you have sort of a cost-reward ratio that you're weighing. You know you want to hold these people accountable for what they did to you, but you also know that's going to come at a cost. Your pride.
It's very weird having a ghostwriter appear on your book tour because you are dead. It kind of takes the name ghostwriter to a whole new level, doesn't it? Sheesh. But make no mistake, if she were still alive, it would be Virginia who would be giving this interview. In another world, in another life, maybe.
Privacy, obviously, but also in the case of Virginia, some of these men had threatened her. Some of these men had threatened her physically. She'd had death threats that the FBI found credible and called her, and she and her family rented a camper van in Australia where they lived and fled into the wilds of Australia for 3 weeks to try to figure out what to do next. So there were real risks and legal risks. There were people that said to her, basically, it doesn't matter what you say or what's true, we're going to keep you in court for the rest of your life if you don't take our names out of your mouth. So there were a lot of decisions that she had to make about what names were going to go in. There are new names there, but as you say, there are names left out. I guess what I would add to that is that this book was never intended to be a list of names. If you want a list of names, you can go to the Epstein files, and they are there. Not just Virginia's names, and I know all of the ones that she told the FBI repeatedly, but other victims have bravely come forward. And this investigation has been going on for many, many years, since the first time that Epstein was arrested and charged back in 2000, I believe, 8. There's a lot of information there, and so to put and this is what my op-ed in the New York Times is about, to put the burden always on victims, the weakest among us who've already been hurt, to make them repeat on demand, instead of having law enforcement do its job. And I think that's why a lot of the American public is calling for the release of the Epstein files.
In the book, Virginia writes that she was beaten and raped by a well-known prime minister. I think the British version of the book says minister.
I think that's a great point, because the number one critique against the Epstein files is that it's a witch hunt against Trump, when it's still, it's really about Jeffrey Epstein and how, but he's dead, so let's put this story to rest.
Job. And I think that's why a lot of the American public is calling for the release of the law enforcement, to make burden always on victims, the weakest among us who've already been hurt, to make them repeat on demand, instead of having law enforcement do its job. And I think that's why a lot of the American public is calling for the release of the Epstein files.
In the book, Virginia writes that she was beaten and raped by a well-known prime minister. I think the British version of the book says minister. This is prime minister. Who is she talking about?
Well, I can't reveal any of the names that are not in the book. I mean, and I'll tell you a couple of reasons why. One, this is Virginia's book, and these were decisions that she had to make for her safety, but also the safety of her family. And just because Virginia is gone does not mean her family is not in danger. Some of these people are scary. So I respect her choices. So, I mean, I guess that's the short answer. It's her book, and we're not going to go any farther than that. There are names that she has named in public depositions. There are 4 document dumps. I've read all of them. And there are names there. The names have been released by others at times. So the names are out there. But
One
again,
of the names that is mentioned in these document dumps is the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who was close to Jeffrey Epstein.
Yes, his name is mentioned in the document dumps.
Let me ask you about what's happening right now with Prince Andrew. He is voluntarily, supposedly, on the eve of the release of Nobody's Girl, voluntarily given up his titles. But the king could strip him of his title, right? His father. Mm-hmm. I mean, his brother. His brother. He clearly, and she describes the encounters with him. She describes being raped by him the 3rd time in an orgy in Jeffrey Epstein's island in the Caribbean, with young women, girls who couldn't even speak English because they were from another place. She said Jeffrey liked them that way because they were easier to deal with. But he clearly knew her age, right? Because at the beginning, when he was with Ghislaine Maxwell, is that Jeffrey Epstein who took the famous picture with Ghislaine in the background and Andrew with his brother, Prince Andrew, still with his arm around Virginia?
Yes, I mean, the backstory around that photo is that Virginia always traveled with point-and-shoot disposable cameras, because she was about to be going around the world. She'd never traveled in this way. She was not a person of means. Her family was not wealthy. So she traveled with these little, disposable cameras. And when Ghislaine had woken her up that morning and said, get up, sleepyhead. We're going to have an amazing day. You're going to meet a prince today. And she took her shopping, and then she bought her outfits. And Virginia chose the outfit that is in that picture. And so when the prince comes and she's introduced to him, she realizes, and we say this in the book, my mom would kill me if I met a prince and didn't get a picture of it. So she runs into her room and she gets her camera and she hands it to Epstein, and Epstein takes the picture. I mean, remember, this is a young woman. She is 17 at that point. When she was a child, she watched the movie Cinderella on repeat. Meeting a prince was a big deal. These were supposed to be the best of us.
Why did Prince Andrew know her age even before she said it?
Well, there was a game that Ghislaine Maxwell played where she would often ask people to guess the ages of the girls. And in this particular case, as we relate in the book, she says to Andrew, guess her age. And he guesses correctly, 17. And then...
That's crazy. Such a disgusting thing that pedophiles do. Like, the age means nothing. It's all about how they look, is the pedophile mindset, where they're like, I bet you can't even tell what age. This social construction of years around the sun. What is this? Like, go ahead and guess. God, it's so fucking repugnant. That's why the files need to be released. To make an example out of these fucking monsters. And instead, the woman who said that, Ghislaine Maxwell, is getting preferential treatment. And it is as close as you can get without getting a pardon.
And explains why he did so well at this game, because he says, you're around the age of my daughters. I think his daughters were a little bit younger. So the key thing there is he knew how old she was. And I think if you could line up all the men that Virginia was trafficked to and ask them why they did it, I think some of them would probably try to use as an excuse, well, we didn't know they were underage. In this case, we have a direct connection between his consciousness of her age and the reality, and that's just sort of an amazing detail in the book.
And we should say Prince Andrew denies all of this, but I'm going to give it to Ron.
Continues to deny all of this. He has settled his lawsuit. When she sued him for raping and battering her, he settled that lawsuit.
For millions of dollars.
I don't know the amount.
Ron.
I wanted to ask you about Ghislaine Maxwell. She was not just a procurer of victims as well. She was a direct abuser of these women as well. Could you talk about that?
Absolutely. I'm not quite sure how the narrative on Ghislaine Maxwell has somehow shifted, even though she's been convicted in a court of law of being a key member of this sexual trafficking scheme. Somehow people have started to think that maybe she's like just a receptionist, or she was keeping the date book. This is a woman who abused girls herself, didn't just procure, which is evil enough, using her gender to lure girls into this net. She did that. Poor girls, particularly. There were a few that weren't, but most were poor. But then she not only participated in the initial sort of initiation of these girls into the massage room and all the sex and abuse that came there, but she would then demand that they service her sexually. She would hurt them during sex. I mean, Virginia tells a story about being hurt with a ghastly sex toy that Ghislaine was using on her and intentionally hurting her because she was dissatisfied or angry at her in some way. So this woman is a sexual abuser herself, and this book makes that clear.
We have to wrap up because I know you have to go, but I do want to just ask, when Virginia was alive, before she took her own life, she had 3 children, and talks about writing this when her baby girl was born and wanting to turn around to being a survivor and to being a role model for others to speak out. President Trump, when he was running for office, ran on one of his platforms was to release the Epstein files.
There's a lot of evil and a lot of sadness in this story. Like, if Virginia was murdered, that's evil. If she committed suicide, that's incredibly sad. Think about all the loose ends she wanted to tie up. before taking her own life. She wanted to get her book published. She wanted to give birth, you know? But you live with this abuse every single day. In your mind. It doesn't go away. That's why they're called survivors.
What would it mean to Virginia today if these Epstein files were released? That it wasn't on people like her and all the other victims, but the files themselves to speak.
I was with her in October in Australia. This is right before the presidential election, and she was thrilled that the former president who was running for president, who she hoped would win the presidency. Why? Because he had promised to release these files. And why was that important to her? Because it validated the experience of not just her, but so many others. And I'm glad that you mentioned her children as well, because one of the things this book does is it shows it's not just a catalog of horrors. It's a woman who was terribly abused as a child, escapes from that terrible abuse valiantly, forms a family, which is in itself a triumph, and then becomes an advocate. So it's the entire arc of her life, and it's a woman in full, a complicated woman in full who is not just the things that were done to her. She was a person of open heart. She wanted to make the world a better place for all of us. She was really looking out for all of our children, not just hers.
We want to thank you so much for being with us. We hope to have you back. I want to end with the words of Virginia Roberts Giuffre herself. She writes, I yearn too for a world in which perpetrators face more shame than their victims do, and where anyone who's been trafficked can confront their abusers when they're ready, no matter how much time has passed. If this book moves us even an inch closer to a reality like that, if it helps just one person, I'll have achieved my goal. Those are the words of Virginia Roberts Giuffre, Amy Wallace, ghostwriter of her memoir, Nobody's Girl, a memoir of surviving abuse and fighting for justice. We will also link to your piece in the New York Times, Why Virginia Roberts Giuffre Would Not Stop Talking About Jeffrey Epstein. Thanks for watching Democracy Now! On YouTube. Subscribe to the channel and turn on...
Fucking whoa, dude. Incredible. Ending with kind of a memorial to her legacy. Incredible. And the fact that Democracy Now! Can do all of that in less than 20 minutes is wild. Really well done.
Alright guys, so Trump is bringing us closer and closer to a full-blown regime change war with Venezuela. Just today, we had the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, announce what I think is the 8th strike off the coast of Venezuela again.
Oh my god, look at its title. Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth. At Sec War. Get fucked.
And what they're claiming are these terrorist narco-trafficking vessels, right? With absolutely no evidence whatsoever that that's actually the case. Here we can see what this strike looked like. You can see this tiny little boat down here getting blown out of the water. Essentially the people on board summarily executed with no due process whatsoever, right? Even if they were presumed to be or thought to be actual drug traffickers, which again, there's no indication or evidence that that's even the case. But if they were, the procedure there would be to arrest them, right? The punishment for drug trafficking would be maybe you get a day in court and then you would be prosecuted and maybe have some jail time, right? The punishment for alleged drug trafficking is not being summarily executed on the spot. And even then, drug trafficking is not an act of terrorism, right? It's an economic act that we're witnessing here. An illegal one, yeah, but an economic act, not an act that's intended to terrorize the domestic population in the United States. So every single part of this is totally and completely ridiculous, and it's essentially trying to lay the groundwork, trying to set the stage for an eventual regime change operation against Venezuela, because that's the core accusation here, is that Venezuela is this massive drug trafficking hub, and they're sending drugs to the United States and terrorizing the American people and killing everybody, right? That's the allegation. Now, we also have here from the New York Times that Trump has authorized covert CIA action in Venezuela. We also have the Air Force now flying, I guess, practice runs or demonstrations in Venezuelan airspace or near Venezuela with B-52 nuclear-capable bombers. So we have that as well. And then we also have here from CNN a list of all of the military assets that the U.S. currently has deployed in the Caribbean, gearing up for a potential invasion or operation against Venezuela. I mean, you can see here, you know, Wasp-class amphibious assault ship, amphibious transport dock, amphibious transport dock, guided missile cruisers, destroyers, more of those, you know, V-22 Ospreys, you have Navy helicopters, you have a bunch of different forms of, you know, aircrafts here, 10 fighter jets, supersonic jet trainers, heavily armed fixed-wing gunships. I mean, look at all of the resources that we are deploying off the coast of Venezuela, preparing for this buildup. Now, in the midst of all of this, I'm going to show you a couple different clips here. The first one that we have is on Fox News with the liberal commentator part of the Five show that they have, and she's just going to lay out the bare facts that we have in terms of what's actually going on with these strikes and call out the fact that they're essentially summarily executing people, that we have no idea who they are, they're not providing evidence that these actually are narco traffickers, and she's going to talk to the host on all of that here.
Well, I think that there's always a choice, and you're right about the demand issue, and I wish that we could do more about that. And this has been going on forever, that we have a drug consumption problem here and a drug supply problem coming from South and Latin America. So I totally get that. But when you're looking at how this fight is being executed at this particular moment, it doesn't make a lot of sense. First and foremost, the fact that no one can confirm that we've actually been taking out narco traffickers or huge drug traffickers, however you want to say it. And last week when we were talking about this, Dana had just seen the alert that the admiral in charge of the Southern Command had resigned. And he was the one who was in charge of this. And the reporting is that he wasn't comfortable with the mission and had been pushing back within the Pentagon. And do you think he would have resigned if everything was by the book? So we have 32 people that have been killed so far, 7 individual strikes. We know that the Colombian president is alleging at least that an innocent fisherman was murdered. We know that there's a family from Trinidad who's saying that a member of their family was killed. And then it is really important that we have repatriated 2 people, 1 to Colombia, 1 to Ecuador, because that indicates that we don't have any evidence to prosecute them, that we didn't know who these guys were. Because if you did have evidence, you would bring them before a court. And I know that you're going to make fun of me, and I am prepared for it each and every day. But drug traffickers also have rights. The law applies. We should have the evidence. They should be charged with something, and they should come before a court of law. And Rand Paul was on the Sunday shows this weekend, and he said to Kristen Welker, when you kill someone, if you're not in a declared war...
That's crazy. You're going to make fun of me, but drug traffickers have rights. That's wild.
Which we
Welcome
are not,
to Fox
Congress
News.
Of the war powers, you really need to know someone's name at least. You have to accuse them of something. You have to present evidence. So all these people have been blown up without any evidence of a crime. They're also saying that it's about fentanyl, and people who analyze the area are saying that there's drugs that go through, but it's mostly cocaine and marijuana that are headed actually to Europe and to Africa. So the government story is not adding up.
I mean, look at how just utterly furious and disappointed the rest of the hosts there are that they have to sit here and listen to her just lay out basic, you know, uncontroversial facts about what's going on here. I mean, listen, on the first part of that, it's like, yeah, the reason that you need due process in this kind of a situation, even for alleged drug traffickers, is because if you don't have due process, then who's going to stop anybody, the government, from accusing you of being a drug trafficker or me of being a drug trafficker and summarily executing us? Like, if that's the standard, if you don't need to provide any evidence before executing somebody for an alleged crime, then we're all screwed, right? We're all fucked in that circumstance. So you need due process, right? Again, the punishment for alleged drug trafficking is that you would seize the boat, you would arrest them, you would bring them to court, try them, and then find out whether or not they're guilty, and then maybe they get a sentence for that. But that's not what's happening here. And as she pointed out there, we have multiple instances now, including of non-Venezuelan nationals. There were some Colombians, there were some from Trinidad who have been killed in this, people who were just regular fishermen, right? Who absolutely were not involved in drug trafficking in any way, shape, or form. So these are war crimes. Like, that's what we're describing here. It's just murder. It's murder. That's exactly what it is. Now, we continue here because we also have a member of his own party, his own coalition here, Rand Paul, who does tend to, break from Donald Trump and break from the rest of his coalition when it comes to matters of war. So here is Rand Paul on this entire situation on his recent appearance on Piers Morgan.
Number one, there is no fentanyl made in Venezuela. Not just a little bit, there's none being made in Venezuela. These are outboard boats that, in order for them to get to Miami, you would have to stop and refuel 20 times. They're in all likely going to Trinidad and Tobago, which is an island right off of the coast of Venezuela. So there's a lot of reasons to be worried about this. But number one is the broader principle of when can you kill people indiscriminately? When you're at war. That's why when we declare war, it's supposed to be done by Congress. It's supposed to be thoughtful. It's supposed to be debated. And we're not supposed to do it willy-nilly. And then when you have war, you just kill people in the war zone. And even then there are rules of engagement. But interdicting drugs has always been a criminal activity and a criminal anti-crime sort of activity where we don't just summarily execute people, we actually present evidence and convict them.
So again, very what you would think should be basic stuff here that we're talking about. Number one, Trump does not have any sort of authority from Congress to be getting us into a war with Venezuela or a war with the drug cartels, as, you know, amorphous as that may mean, depending on whatever Trump's definition of that is. I mean, he's threatened multiple different countries with acts of war in response to this entire situation. We'll get to more of that here when it comes to Colombia specifically. But again, doesn't have permission from Congress to be doing any of this. He's essentially marching us into a regime change operation with no legal or constitutional permission whatsoever. And then he's also pointing out there's some other basic facts on this. The allegation from the Trump administration is, he says, well, there are hundreds of thousands of Americans who have died due to overdoses in the United States over the last number of years. Okay, that's true. What are they primarily dying from? Well, they're primarily dying from fentanyl overdoses, right? Okay, but where is the fentanyl coming from? Well, it's not coming from Venezuela, right? In fact, it's basically 0% of fentanyl that makes its way into the United States that is coming from Venezuela. So that cannot be the logic. Like, it's not even true that that's the case. So on that front, it's also just ridiculous. And then he also points out here, like, if you look at some of these boats that we're talking about, you want me to believe that these dingy little, what look to be fishing vessels are making it all the way from Venezuela up through, you know, by Puerto Rico or by Haiti or whatever track they want to go, all the way to Miami? That's where they're going? I mean, it's just ridiculous. As he points out there, they have to stop to refuel, you know, 20 times just to make that journey to get what? Like a tiny boat full of a couple of bags of fentanyl or something into the United States? I mean, all of this is such obvious bullshit and laying the pretext for what we have here, Lindsey Graham absolutely bloodthirsty for, which is, again, regime change in Venezuela. So here we have Lindsey Graham on Sean Hannity getting absolutely...
The majority of fentanyl enters the United States through legal points of entry, usually by American citizens.
Rock hard for not only the prospect of a regime change operation, but here he even floats Venezuela becoming the 51st state.
I had a chat with you this weekend. I thought you had a pretty darn good idea, and you said you were going to share it with the president. I want to know if you did, and that is this opposition leader in Venezuela that won the Nobel Prize that said it really deserved to go to Donald Trump. Sounds like a pretty good leader to me for the people of Venezuela and the end of narco-terrorism and a better relationship with the U.S. Or if they choose maybe the 51st state, I don't know.
Sounds good to me, but the opposite.
Okay, so there you have Hannity confirming the quote from Lindsey Graham that he wants Venezuela to become the 51st state, but not until that we overthrow their government and install this Nobel Peace Prize winner who was recently given this prize here a couple of weeks ago. So a little bit more on that, because obviously Trump was trying to lobby himself to get the Nobel Prize. They instead chose to give it to this person here, Maria Machado. And keep in mind, guys, the Nobel Peace Prize is by no means an apolitical thing. In fact, it's massively, massively politically calculated as a sort of award, if you will. And I think it's pretty clear why they gave this to Maria Machado. So here from Ben Norton, he says, the Nobel Peace Prize is a farce given to war criminals like Obama and Kissinger and coup plotters. Maria Corina Machado is a far-right coup plotter who has been funded by the U.S. government for years. She asked the U.S. and Israel to invade Venezuela to overthrow President Maduro. Here we have the statement of her talking about Benjamin Netanyahu. She says, today I am sending a letter to President of Argentina and to Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, asking them to apply their strength and influence to advance in dismantling the criminal Venezuelan regime immediately linked to drug trafficking and terrorism. So this is a person, again, who has been in some way, shape, or form involved in multiple coup attempts against the Venezuelan government, who is in favor of the U.S. crippling Venezuela with sanctions, and who has openly called for the Israeli government and the U.S. government to help to overthrow the Venezuelan government. So, I mean, again, and also dedicated her Nobel Prize to Donald Trump in a pretty explicit political play there for potentially installing herself as the future leader of Venezuela under the thumb of the United States. So there you go. This is the person they were referencing in this clip about installing, I guess, as the next sort of Juan Guaido of Venezuela. So we also have this here. This was an interesting article from the New York Times. I know that this is glitching out over here, so apologies for that, but the headline is Venezuela's Maduro offered the U.S. his nation's riches to avoid conflict. They say Venezuela's autocrat had promised allocating his country's oil wealth and other natural resources to the United States and ending deals with American adversaries to appease Donald Trump. So Maduro, basically as part of these negotiations that Trump recently cut off, right? He was basically telling Trump, he's like, look, I don't want a regime change operation. I don't want a war with the United States of America. I want better relations with the United States. I will literally help to give you my country's resources, right? Which is presumably what the United States has wanted for all of these years that we've been trying to meddle in Venezuela, that we've been sanctioning them, that we've been trying to do regime change on them, is like, okay, well, we want access to their natural resources. We don't want Venezuela to use their resources for their own people or for their own country. We want it to be used to the benefit of American corporations, right? That's presumably the whole idea of this kind of an operation. And here you have Maduro himself, who's saying, look, I will help to unleash the resources, whether it's oil, whether it's our, other minerals or whatever else the case may be, and I'll even reduce or end my business deals with countries that are adversarial to the United States. This is what he was offering to the US. And then Trump was later asked about this, and he said, basically, he shrugged it off, and he said, well, yeah, he doesn't want to fuck with the United States. Okay, well, if he's offering even this, then it's like, well, what do you even want in this?
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. We're continuing to look at the escalating tension between the U.S. and Colombia after the Colombian president, Gustavo Petro, condemned the U.S. for blowing up boats in the Caribbean. This week on Truth Social, President Trump called Colombian President Petro an illegal drug dealer. He's also called him a lunatic, speaking on Air Force One.
You look at the fields are loaded up with drugs, and they refine the drugs, and they make tremendous amounts of cocaine, and they send it all over the world, and they destroy families. No, Colombia...
Tremendous amounts of cocaine? That's a sound drop.
Tremendous... You look at the fields are loaded up with drugs, and they refine the drugs, and they make tremendous amounts of cocaine, and they send it all over the world, and they destroy families. No, Colombia is out of control, and now they have the worst president they've ever had. He's a lunatic who's got a lot of problems, mental problems.
Still with us is Ambassador Daniel Garcia Pena, Colombia's ambassador to the U.S., who Petro just recalled as tensions rise between the U.S. and Colombia. We're also joined in Colombia by Manuel Rosenthal, Colombian physician and activist.
There's a certain desperation in Trump right now. Is it because it's been 22 days of a government shutdown that as soon as you stop it, it will release the Epstein files, essentially? You are one judge away and one government shutdown ending from the Epstein files being released. Mark my words.
All right, time to jump into some controversy. This is getting a lot of attention online, and I thought it was worth breaking down my perspective.
The terminally online Graham Platner tattoo controversy.
Perspective on this as well.
Am I about to never watch The Rational National again? Let's find out.
Well, as what some people are saying online, but Democratic Senate primary candidate for Maine, Graham Platner, is in some hot water right now over a tattoo that was revealed in a leaked wedding video that he himself presented to a podcast that he was on because he knew it was going to be leaked eventually, and explained. So I'll get to what this tattoo is, all the discussions around that. Before I get to any of that, though, I think it's worth acknowledging that this is in a primary race. So the primary for Senate in Maine, Graham Platner is the more left-wing progressive candidate in the race, the working class candidate. He's backed by several unions so far, backed by people like Bernie Sanders and a couple other Democrats as well. I'll get to that. But the other candidate in the race...
Backed by Zionist Bernie Sanders? Okay. Still means nothing. You can't name the other Democrats.
The other Maine candidate is Janet Mills. Janet Mills is the governor of Maine, the Chuck Schumer approved candidate. She just decided to get in recently after Graham Platner was receiving all this attention. And
and then this is the argument where it's like, do you want the alternative?
Kind of what you expect. A standard Democrat defender of the status quo. Recent decisions like this, Governor Mills will not sign bill restricting police cooperation with ICE, so underhandedly helping Trump in some ways. After this happened as well, she condemned this. Portland City Council votes to divest from companies doing business with Israel. Portland, Maine, of course. Belfast City Council also voted to divest from companies associated with the Israeli military. And then Governor Mills came out to condemn those votes, saying, I can say that I hear you, and I can tell you I will not support any similar divestments at the state.
Yeah, and our president is facilitating a genocide. So did the last president. And then the alternative said that they wouldn't do anything different. So what is this talk about, oh, the alternative is bad? You're talking about a fucking war criminal.
Level should any such legislation reach my desk. So
Graham Platner is a war criminal.
Status quo, defender of Israel, even during a genocide, Democrat. That's the other choice in the race. I point this out before we get to the Graham Platner stuff, because Kamala Harris, during the election, had a lot of red flags. Her refusal to really acknowledge what was happening, what Israel was doing in Gaza, was a major problem. Yet still, I encourage people to obviously support.
If you participated in the illegal invasion of Iraq, you're a war criminal.
Support Kamala Harris over Donald Trump because an election is
and the occupation, and then you went back as a private contractor. You're a war criminal, dude.
It's choices. What is your best choice in that situation?
If not legally, you're a piece of shit.
Much like now, you have Graham Platner, who, look, we'll get to this tattoo. But comparing the records here, like, let's be clear, the contrast isn't as stark.
So, comparing the records, can you stomach a Nazi tattoo? Ask yourself, what flays from your morality you can spare? Fuck you. Trump ends democracy. Get the fuck out of here, dude. As if we had democracy to begin with. Fetterman 2.0, the craziest candidate in America.
If it's on the second category, then maybe Platner is going to have a better time overall. If it's on the category that actually frustrates people and stress tests the liberal leftist coalition position here, then it's his service field. Oh God, I believe it. Graham Platner opposition file. There's more damaging information that is yet to be revealed. Oh God, I believe it. I believe it because how did you not know that your boy had a totem cough on his chest? I don't give a shit about the Reddit stuff. The Reddit stuff is not bad at all. Like, the Reddit stuff shows a person who's grown from his previous positions. That's not bad at all. That's like, actually, like, if that was the only thing, if the Reddit shit was the only thing he had, that's unironically the best possible, the best case scenario. But the totem cough is crazy, and the fact that they didn't actually see that he had a totem cough on his chest. Like, just yesterday, no one knew his first dad was a Nazi. No, not no one. 40% of this community knew, which was lower than I thought it would be, considering that I cover this kind of shit extensively. It was more so disappointing for myself. It was more so disappointing for me because I feel like I failed as someone who tries to educate people on stuff like this.
Oh my God, Hasan. Dude, the leopards ate your face. Oh my God. The disappointment that Bad Empanada predicted happened like clockwork. Oh my God, dude.
Will the Democrats ever learn to stop swooning? I refer, as you may have guessed, to the case of Maine. Yeah, all of this stuff also does come across as like basically punishing the Dems for falling in love with a bad candidate. You know what I mean? Like, that's what it feels like to me. It goes something like this. Political outsider, a mostly new name, Mount statewide campaign with online video that leans heavily on compelling biography and powerful oratory. Out-of-state liberal hobbyists quickly fall in love and fork over money. And journalists rush to profile the latest heartthrob before inevitable disappointment when the candidate loses or, well, becomes John Fetterman. Platner is the latest example. A military veteran turned oysterman who looked the hirsute part. The Mainer populist candidacy seemed to be an immaculate conception. The contributions piled up, the profiles were published, and then suddenly there was a disruption of the formula. Or maybe it was more of an acceleration. Once his Democratic rival, Maine Governor Janet Mills, entered the race, Platner was hit with a nor'easter of Oppo research that had the added value of being his own damning words. Rationalizing, like, this stuff doesn't matter. This stuff is not real. Rationalizing political violence, calling himself a communist, referring to all police as bastards, calling himself an Antifa super soldier. None of that stuff is bad. All of that stuff is not only redeemable, but I would dare I say good, okay? It just shows a private citizen and their personal resentment towards a lot of the institutions that has failed them and others like them, okay? On the other hand, however, the Nazi tattoo on his naked torso is not in the same vein, and it actually creates an entirely separate reality where he is maybe not such a good guy, especially when you pair it up with the Blackwater 2018 mercenary run that he had, especially on top of 4 tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. That for sure like creates a very different personality.
But the fact that that wasn't enough in the first place is the problem, Hasan.
How do you know he knows all about Antifa? Yeah. There is one more to come. I'm told by sources very familiar with the Platner opposition file who spoke on the condition of anonymity, and some of it will be even...
Dude, his chat's saying that he's just edgy. You guys are brain rotten beyond belief.
More localized, which will make for ready-made targeted mail and digital ads from his opponent. I've learned, for example, that in 2020, Platner went online and called the Hancock County Sheriff's Office a den of overweight pansies and flatly said cops are opportunistic cowards. You can guess how many Mainers in and around Hancock County, a rural region outside its summer resort enclaves, are related to or friends with law enforcement officers there. Platner did not respond to a request for comment. This won't slow Platner's apologies. The left-wingers are so enamored with... Dude, this is not even left-wingers that are enamored with Platner's politics. There are some left-wingers who are enamored with his politics, but mostly left-wingers have been, from the start, being like, no, he's Blackwater, this guy. They've even yelled at me for saying, hold on, I need to see this for myself. Even though it's understandable that you are suspicious of someone who literally joined Blackwater in 2018. I think this person saying like there's more damaging information to come is going to be more. There's two different brackets. There's two different brackets of opposition research for Graham Platner. The most insane candidacy we've seen so far. Perhaps one of the closest to the median voter in some ways. The one bracket is Blackwater mercenary, 4-tour machine gunner for the Marine Corps, neo-Nazi tattoo, okay? When combined together, it creates an irredeemable picture, okay, of someone who maybe is overselling how frustrated he is with his service, okay? On the other hand, there is a flood of other types of opposition research, which is, he says cops are overweight pansies, they're opportunists, he says he's an Antifa super soldier, he says he's a communist, he says he's a socialist.
They're gonna say that anyway, even if it's a lie.
This other bracket of opposition research is unironically not only not irredeemable, but actually good. Okay? That's actually good. That's good shit. So if it's on the second category, then maybe Platner is going to have a better time overall. If it's on the category that actually frustrates people and stress tests the liberal leftist coalition position here, then it's his service. My God, you love hugging and kissing the troops law so servile. Oh my God, brother, I don't know how many times we have to talk about this, okay? I don't know how many times I have to bring this up over and over again. There are so many people, both in this community and out of this community, that have gone into the military-industrial complex and have done heinous shit in the act of serving for the military, okay? As long as they atone for it and recognize that shit was wrong, and up not only on the basis of the fact that, oh no, Mr. Troop Lover has found an anti-imperialist, wait, what? I'm calling into question whether or not this person actually is a disillusioned vet, okay? Their name is Knights Templar. I'm calling that into question overall. But as far as a immediate opposition to anyone who has ever served, regardless of what they're saying, regardless of what they're doing now, yeah, I don't play that game at all. I don't play that game at all. I also don't play the game of like unconditionally thanking everyone for their service either. I don't. You can call me a centrist when it comes to veterans. I'm a vet centrist, okay? I treat people like they're human beings if they've done heinous shit, regardless. Especially considering that it's not considered heinous at all by the broader majority, by the masses in general, okay? And you want to build a mass movement. I mean, maybe you don't. I don't think you give a shit personally. The veteran stuff is not irredeemable across.
Okay, straw manning is not the route to go. Look, what the fuck?
It's not. Nowhere near as bad as Blackwater, which is when you personally decide to go into the mercenary sector after doing 4 tours. I mean, you're an adventurist. You've definitely clearly enjoyed the heinous shit that you've done.
Finally, some words on his actual victims. Wow, it's only been an hour plus on the tattoo, Hasan. His service, my God, you love hugging and kissing the troops. LOL, so servile. Hogs don't consider it bad, so it's not worth taking the unpopular position to oppose it publicly?
Okay, that's the distinction. That's the difference. Okay? I don't give a what someone's background is, especially if they have atoned for it, especially if they recognize that it was up, in spite of the fact that no one tells them it's up. By and large, in American society, no one thinks that what veterans are doing is heinous. So if you come to that conclusion on your own through that experience, I obviously place a lot of value on that sort of thing. Okay? Hogs don't consider it as bad, so it's not worth taking the unpopular position. No, it's not hogs, you moron. It's everyone. If you literally across the board went to any place in the United States of America and you were like, all veterans are, they would kill you with hammers, okay? They would beat the out of you. It's not just hogs, dumbass. It's the same principle behind like criticizing liberalism or criticizing actions that the American military engages in is one thing, which I do all the time, but deeming every single person irredeemable due to what they have done is entirely separate, especially when you're trying to build mass mobilization. Oh my bad, the reactionary violence of Americans in defense of their troops makes it not worth it. No, dude, I do think a lot of people professionally misunderstand my position. okay? I will always make space in this community, regardless of being prominently known as Mr. America Deserved 9/11, okay? I have always made space in this community for veterans that are conflicted about their service, okay? You don't, I do. I'm not Mr. Troop Exploder. I've never been that kind of leftist, and I will never be that kind of leftist. That's it. That's it. Yeah, but with the IDF, I'm not sure I could be as forgiving as you. No, even with the IDF, there are people who are anti-Zionist who were in the IDF, man. What the? You are genuinely evil for getting mad at him to have that tattoo than him voluntarily serving in the U.S. Army 4 times. I'm so disappointed right now as an Iraqi. No, it's those two things combined that paint a different picture about whether he was conflicted by his service or not. Okay? That's it. And if you think this implies that I don't think victims of American imperialism...
Oh, you think we needed a whole bigger picture? We need more information. What are you, AOC? Learning that Mahmoud Khalil has been kidnapped? I think I need more information before I condemn this. Fucking cowardly.
Are irrelevant or something.
This comes to Hasan's like inability to take criticism as well. Like if you go back and watch the Stavi episode where he makes fun of his outfit for like 2 seconds, Hasan comes in way too strong, and he regularly is not aware when chatters are joking. Like every stream, there's at least one instance, I feel like. But I don't tune into every stream, so maybe I don't know what I'm talking about.
You're wrong. Anyway, having said that, don't worry. I'm in favor of a candidate that is much better for victims of American empire. Janet Mills, okay? Janet Mills. That's right, baby. Mills Mafia, Janet Series, rise up.
Are we really going to talk about the opposition? The so-called opposition as a justification for our shitty candidate? Literally doing exactly what the Rational National just fucking did.
Yes, but we've known for a while that he did 4 tours and then joined Blackwater. Look, doing 1 tour and then becoming disillusioned is one thing. Doing 4 tours? No, dude, shut up. It's the only aspect...
Doing 1 tour and becoming disillusioned is one thing. Doing 4 tours as... and one as a merc is entirely another thing? Why are you telling him to shut up? Yes, but we've known for a while that he did 4 tours and then joined Blackwater, and you were still on his side even when we were against it. Flawless. There's nothing wrong with what this chatter is saying.
Look, doing 1 tour and then becoming disillusioned is one thing. Doing 4 tours? No, dude, shut up. It's the only aspect of this that's like... The only aspect of this is not 1 tour versus 4 tours. The only aspect of this that's like... is borderline irredeemable and now absolutely irredeemable in comparison, especially when you factor in every other thing that's come out so far, is the Blackwater thing in 2018.
Redemption's on the mind, huh, Hasan?
Okay, that's it. Blackwater is personally joining a brigade. Blackwater is when you are personally making the decision after you've done your 4 tours to decide
No one's talking about him being irredeemable. We're saying that he doesn't represent us. And he doesn't deserve to take a paycheck of American tax dollars when he's a fucking Nazi. That's all. It's not that he's irredeemable. He could be fully redeemed. It's just we're not gonna pay his paycheck to be a senator.
To make the decision personally to go back into mercenary shit, okay?
See how he has to straw man and like, well, what about the straw man? What about the opposition? Like, he's floundering, dude. This is crazy.
Worth noting, Oppo isn't just personal oopsies for
getting just attacked from all sides from multiple different chatters and not having anything good to say to them.
1, you can never be sure what someone did while in office, Cuomo, Spitzer, et al. But a good contrast message can elevate even what seems boring. Remember Larry Hogan beating LG because of the rain tax? Oppo is the art of contrast and creating a vocabulary to express what voters feel is wrong but cannot yet say. Salacious stuff is more exciting, see all human history. But end of the day...
He's just moved on. I'm done with this. Alright, we'll close out with this and then...
Welcome to Why America. I'm Legia Miller. Last week, ProPublica released this doozy of a report. We found that more than 170 U.S. citizens have been held by immigration agents. They've been kicked, dragged, and detained for days. Well-documented abuses perpetrated by ICE and other DHS agents on the streets in cities and towns across the country against U.S. citizens and non-citizens alike has been mounting. From pepperballing a priest to just yesterday shooting an undocumented immigrant during a traffic stop. Groups of masked men grabbing people on the streets and shoving them into vans, disappearing them, their families not knowing what happened to them until days or even weeks later. DHS has routinely, in every article I've read, used the excuse that agents are being doxxed and violence against them has increased 1,000%. So they have to cover their faces and they have to use increased force because the danger posed against them is getting higher. DHS also routinely lies about the circumstances surrounding agents' use of force, saying the person in question was acting aggressively, was armed, assaulted the officer first, and more. Lies that rarely are proven in court, indicating they are willing to say whatever it takes to do whatever they want. And earlier this year, DOJ did away with DHS's Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, the internal investigative body that oversaw DHS activity and acted as an internal watchdog to respond to allegations of civil rights abuses perpetrated by DHS officers. Of course, ICE and DHS were not perfect before Trump came to office. They were arresting U.S. citizens erroneously and otherwise abusing their authority under Obama and other presidents as well. But at a slower rate, and at least back then, immigration attorneys had a place they could turn to lodge their complaints. Now there is zero internal oversight, and there is also zero external oversight because DHS regularly either refuses to provide information to the public or lies about it when they do issue statements or more frequently tweets. This has led many of you to ask me, what can states do to push back? Can states arrest federal agents? What about states' rights? There are Democratic governors and attorneys general voicing their dissent, including most notably J.B. Pritzker of Illinois and Gavin Newsom of California. But writing strongly worded letters and trolling the president on Twitter doesn't exactly do.
I just want to say one thing. Here's the thing. Let me bring you in. Come on, gather around. Check it out. So, Hasan, here's what I'll say about Hasan regretting his support for Graham Platner, or him just floundering in this situation right now. Bad Empanada tried to warn you. Bad Empanada tried to warn you. And what did you do? You threw it back in his face. When will the Dems stop swooning, and when will Bad Empanada stop being vindicated? Oh, man.
Too much to stop the abuse on the streets. This headline from NBC News caught my eye. Shooting by federal officer wounds immigrant and U.S. Marshal in Los Angeles, officials say. Using the Ground News browser extension, I can see that in the U.S., NBC News is considered left-leaning. To get the big picture, I can...
Oh, no shit. You need Ground News to tell you NBC is left-leaning? Oh my god. I want to buy it.
Going to get very different app and website equipped to make sense of what's happening in the... An excellent way to stay informed.
None of it makes sense.
This unlimited access... So what can states do to...
If you want to find news and be informed, you have to go looking for it. No one can do it for you.
Push back against federal use of force. Well, it turns out there's a long history of states pushing back against federal policies they disagree with. Especially relevant to our discussion today is the state opposition leading up to the U.S. Civil War. A helpful piece from the State Democracy Research Initiative at the University of Wisconsin Law School, linked in the sources below, says, quote, in the mid-1800s, some northern states opposed to the Fugitive Slave Act charged U.S. Marshals for capturing or failing to release previously enslaved individuals. In some of these cases, state courts first ordered the Marshals to release captured individuals under a writ of habeas corpus, and the Marshals were then charged with criminal contempt and taken into custody if they disobeyed. The Marshals typically then sought relief in federal court, also under writs of habeas corpus. In one prominent episode, Wisconsin authorities arrested an enslaver and 2 U.S. deputy marshals, charging them with kidnapping and assault and battery for capturing and jailing a previously enslaved person. A federal court ultimately ordered release of the trio, however, on the ground that they were acting in accordance with federal law. This is just one example of numerous instances in which the state authorities stepped in to try to protect the rights of persecuted minorities against the arm of the federal government. And as we saw in this instance, they weren't always successful, but the efforts raised the profile of these activities in a meaningful way. And I think we're quick to write things off for not working when they are, in fact, part of the larger picture, and we can truly use all of the opposition we can get. Whether it's a No Kings protest that maybe didn't create immediate change, but definitely gave many people hope, especially those of you who feel like blue dots in a sea of red. You've commented how heartening it was to see a couple hundred people come out for the small rallies in your communities. You cannot underestimate the kind of long-term impact that can have on organizing an opposition. Just in small towns alone, hundreds if not thousands of people across the country on Saturday realized they're not alone and made connections within their communities. Similarly, don't underestimate the power of a state coming forward and saying, we will do whatever we can to protect our citizens from the federal government agents who are abusing our people, and then actually acting on that promise. And yeah, sometimes it won't work, but we have to keep the big picture and the long game in mind here. One area that does provide a great deal of protection for federal agents against state actions is claiming immunity. They were acting within the scope of their job and therefore can't be held accountable for their actions. But even that isn't an absolute protection. Federal agents and officers are not categorically immune. They are only immune if their actions are necessary to carry out a lawful federal duty. A lawful federal duty. And in acting out their lawful federal duty, the officer must act with reasonable care and prudence under the circumstances. If they act unreasonably, if they break the law, if they're acting outside of their official duties, they do not get immunity. This goes hand in hand with the Supremacy Clause, set forth in the Constitution, which says that federal law trumps state law where there is a conflict. So if federal law says you can't do something, but the state law says that you can, federal law is going to prevail. And so if a state passed its own immigration law, for example, and it was more permissive than the federal law, and then an ICE officer came in to enforce federal immigration laws in that state, the state couldn't say, whoa, 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 we have our own immigration laws here. That's within the purview of the federal government, and the federal laws win out. However, the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment says that anything not explicitly listed as a power of the federal government is left to the power of the states. It's where we get federalism, the idea that we have a federal government, but each individual state also has sovereignty and jurisdiction over its own affairs. So unless the Constitution explicitly gives a power to the federal government, everything else is left to the states. That includes things like policing powers, internal commerce, the stuff that local governments tend to be better suited to manage on the ground. So there's a balancing act in the Supremacy Clause because it gives the federal government ultimate authority, but only over the limited areas listed in the Constitution. Now this has been expanded over the centuries to include things like education, medical regulation, and more because of federal funding, interstate commerce, etc. But for a long time, states' rights was the rallying cry of the right when they didn't agree with liberal administrations. Now the tables have turned, and it is the left calling for the states to exercise their rights and powers to rein in a belligerent administration. But generally speaking, when it comes to immigration enforcement and enforcing federal criminal laws, the feds necessarily have to enter into different states in order to do their work. So generally, federal courts have held that federal agents have immunity if 1, the federal official was doing something authorized by federal law, and 2, the official's actions were necessary and proper in fulfilling their federal duties. A case from 1890 called In Re Nagel is the main Supreme Court precedent we have on the issue. In it, the court held that state law is displaced if it imposes burdens on a federal officer's attempts to protect federal interests or execute federal law, even if no federal statute specifically authorizes the federal official's conduct, as was the case here. Nagel established a two-pronged test for this type of immunity from state criminal law. 1, was the officer performing an act that federal law authorized him to perform? And 2, were his actions necessary and proper to fulfilling his federal duties? If the federal officer satisfies this test, he or she is immune from prosecution for violation of state law. So in theory then, even if an ICE officer kills someone or assaults a US citizen, they get immunity if they pass that two-pronged test. And this is only in theory though, because the Supreme Court has provided relatively little guidance on these analyses beyond In Re Nagel, which again is from 1890. So it really depends on the judge and the state, though I'm sure that this Supreme Court would love a case to come before it so it could give Trump even more power, because even if the lawsuit starts in state court and is being handled entirely by a state's judiciary, if the federal agent claims they were acting within the scope of their duties, they can actually request the state be moved from state court over to federal court, because their defense rests in federal law, specifically the Supremacy Clause immunity. So any situation where a state attempts to thwart the illegal actions of ICE within its own jurisdiction would likely eventually end up in the Supreme Court. This, of course, all hinges on whether the federal officer acted reasonably within their duties and under lawful orders. Is it reasonable to shoot tear gas into a person's frog costume, to shoot a priest with a pepper ball at point-blank range, to kneel on the neck of a 79-year-old car wash owner, breaking his ribs, holding him for days, and offering him zero medical attention? When you have the DHS denying allegations at every turn, that becomes at least partly a question of fact that the lower courts have to figure out, because the federal officer and every federal official will claim that the use of force was reasonable, and it'll be the word and weight of the entire federal government against the word of a few people they abused or wrongfully detained. Luckily, bystanders have been filming. There is also body cam footage. Like, we have access to tools to help establish facts in a way that makes them harder to question, though of course AI is thwarting some of that. So do continue to film the abuse you see for the public record and for potential court records. And in theory, once the facts of the case are viewed and established in the lower courts, the Supreme Court has to take those facts as fact. The government can't just run to the Supreme Court and whine and say the lower court didn't believe them. I mean, technically they can, but it's pretty hard to get higher courts to undermine the findings of fact by a lower court. They are meant to honor them as fact and just analyze how the law applies to those established facts. But as we've seen, the Supreme Court was fine with seeing the fact of racial profiling perpetrated by ICE officers and saying, under the law, that's fine and dandy. So who knows? If given the opportunity, the Supreme Court could find that all of those acts I listed were perfectly reasonable and necessary for the agents to perform their duties. Nevertheless, once again, I think states should be prosecuting as many of these cases as possible in order to assert their authority and rights against abuse by federal agents. There are also arguments states could be making regarding the anti-commandeering principle, a Supreme Court precedent that holds that the federal government cannot commandeer states into the service of the government or into doing something that would normally be a state's right to make decisions about. So, for example, originally the Affordable Care Act required states to expand Medicaid eligibility or face complete Medicaid cuts, which the court found to be undue coercion from the federal government in violation of the anti-commandeering principle. The federal government cannot coerce a state into doing stuff that would normally be within the state's own powers to decide. This argument was successfully used before the U.S. District Court in the Northern District of California earlier this year in a lawsuit filed by San Francisco against the Trump regime's attempts to withhold federal funds from so-called sanctuary jurisdictions. The court in that case wrote, quote, "The 2025 executive order's directives to withhold or freeze federal funding to sanctuary jurisdictions also violate the 10th Amendment because they impose coercive conditions intended to commandeer local officials into enforcing federal immigration practices and law." This anti-commandeering argument is best for states to use in these types of larger issues where Trump is dangling funding over their head to try to force them to take action, especially when it comes to their own police powers, which are pretty well protected as part of states' rights. To thwart the actions of individual officers and ICE as a whole, it's likely the route of arresting and charging ICE officers individually for state criminal offenses that would send a strong message that the state is watching and will not put up with illegal acts on its streets, even if perpetrated by federal officials. Why aren't we seeing more of these lawsuits? Well, this gets messy. It takes up state resources that are often lacking. It's very gray. It's not black and white. And there's no guarantee that it would be a winning strategy, that it would simply be written off as a political charade, no matter how clearly an officer's actions violate state criminal law. Not to mention the fact that people like Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York, who's attempted to hold Trump accountable over numerous offenses, has faced repeated, targeted backlash from the Trump regime. It would mean a concerted effort at all levels of state government by people willing to put their necks on the line to fight back. And I'm not saying those people don't exist, so I hope it becomes a growing trend. I'm just not seeing it at the level I personally would like to. So consider this my call to arms, for legal reasons I mean that metaphorically, for state prosecutors and attorneys general to aggressively investigate and prosecute the actions of federal agents in your states, because ample evidence indicates that ICE agents are acting in ways that are unreasonable and against the law. Not only are they using excessive force and assaulting people in the process, their actions do not enforce any written or existing laws. There is no federal law that mandates the arrest and detention of U.S. citizens who are not credibly accused of doing anything wrong. There is no federal law that mandates physical abuse and assault against unarmed civilians by ICE agents. They are not acting in ways that enforce federal laws. They are acting against the law, and they should be held accountable as such. But let's go over specifically what DHS officers can and cannot do, because it's important to know your rights. And when I say DHS officers, that's an umbrella term to refer to ICE officers, Customs and Border Patrol agents, etc. All the arms of the Gestapo controlled underneath DHS, the Department of Homeland Security. Officers have a lot of leeway to stop you, search you, ask for your documents, and more when you are at a border crossing or an airport. They also have the right to stop you and ask your citizenship at a traffic stop. They are allowed to detain people without a warrant if they have reasonable suspicion that that individual person is violating immigration laws, and if they believe that the person would escape if they took the time to get a warrant. Typically, even without a warrant, their arrests should be based on individualized suspicion that the person that they are targeting is violating immigration laws. But guidance from DHS has led to dragnet raids where they arrest first and then create the individualized suspicion later. This is not how the law works, and individuals getting erroneously caught up in those dragnets are suing as a result. And individual lawsuits are important. There are many nonprofit legal organizations doing great work representing individuals pro bono who've been assaulted or otherwise abused by DHS officers. But they're just a drop in the bucket, which is why why the power of the full state, and multiple of them, needs to come out against illegal activities perpetrated by DHS officers. DHS officers can also arrest citizens if they are acting violently towards the officer or impeding their ability to do their job. Of course, DHS has been lying over and over about this every time they arrest a citizen. DHS officers are required to identify themselves as agents as soon as it is practical and safe to do so during an arrest. They don't have to give their names, but they have to identify themselves as agents and of what agency. They are only allowed to refuse to identify themselves during emergency situations, which is rarely the case when they're pulling people into unmarked vehicles as they're just walking down the sidewalk in broad daylight. Again, DHS will deny. They'll say the officers have seen increased violence and doxing against them, and then they provide zero evidence of said violence or doxing, and usually when sued by the people they abuse, their claims don't hold up in court. So there is growing evidence that DHS officers are not acting within the confines of any federal laws. DHS officers are also still beholden to the laws of the state within which they are operating. Those laws include laws against assault and murder, anti-corruption laws, and civil rights laws under state constitutions. For example, according to that publication from the University of Wisconsin Law School I mentioned earlier, quote, Colorado and Maine both define public servant to include state and federal officials. So each state's anti-corruption laws explicitly cover federal corruption. These include statutes criminalizing bribery, improper gifts to public officials, public official misconduct, and the misuse of official information for private financial gain. Other states have broadly written anti-corruption statutes that do not expressly refer to federal officials, but instead apply to anyone, which presumably includes federal actors. These include statutes criminalizing bribery of private or public employees, extortion, threats, and coercion. To date, state anti-corruption laws do not appear to have been widely used to address federal corruption, but they are on the books as an option, and federal officials likely would not enjoy immunity from prosecution if their conduct does amount to corruption, given that corrupt conduct generally would not be a necessary and proper part of carrying out lawful federal duties. Tom Homan and the bag of cash, anyone? Anti-corruption charges alone could bring down half this administration if states took steps to enforce their laws against federal actors. Add on to that the state criminal statutes and state constitutions that protect civil rights, and there are so many avenues that states can take to prosecute offenders at every level of the federal government. These laws also apply to federal troops and to the National Guard. According to an article in the Military Times, not a publication I often cite to, quote, troops who are ordered to do something illegal are put in a bind. So much so that some argue that troops themselves are harmed when given such orders. They are not trained in legal nuances, and they are conditioned to obey. Yet if they obey manifestly unlawful orders, they can be prosecuted. Some analysts fear that U.S. troops are ill-equipped to recognize this threshold. However, the authors of the article are researchers at the University of Massachusetts Amherst who recently did a study that found that 4 in 5 service members do understand the distinction between legal and illegal orders, the duty to disobey certain orders, and when they should do so. The article goes on to say, quote, U.S. service members take an oath to uphold the Constitution. In addition, under Article 92 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice and the U.S. Manual for Courts Martial, service members must obey lawful orders and disobey unlawful orders. Unlawful orders are those that clearly violate the U.S. Constitution, international human rights standards, or the Geneva Conventions. Service members who follow an illegal order can be held liable and court-martialed or subject to prosecution by international tribunals. Following orders from a superior is no defense. Our poll, fielded between June 13th and June 30th, 2025, shows that service members understand these rules. Of the 818 active duty troops we surveyed, just 9% stated they would obey any order. Only 9% didn't know, and only 2% had no comment. The article says, quote, but the open-ended answers pointed to another struggle troops face. Some no longer trust U.S. law as useful guidance. Writing in their own words about how they would know an illegal order when they saw it, more troops emphasized international law as a standard of illegality than emphasized U.S. law. Others implied that acts that are illegal under international law might become legal in the U.S. Trump will issue illegal orders, wrote one respondent. The new laws will allow it, wrote another. A third wrote, we are not required to obey such laws. Several emphasized the U.S. political situation directly in their remarks, stating they disobey oppression or harming U.S. civilians that clearly goes against the Constitution, or an order for use of the military to carry out deportations. Quote, criminologist Eva Whitehead researched actual cases of troop disobedience of illegal orders and found that when some troops disobey, even indirectly, others can more easily find the courage to do the same. Whitehead's research showed that those who refuse to follow illegal or immoral orders are most effective when they stand up for their actions openly. The initial results of our survey, coupled with a recent spike in calls to the GI Rights Hotline, suggest American men and women in uniform don't want to obey unlawful orders. And as a reminder, the Trump administration fired the lawyers in the military that would provide guidance to officers on the law and how to follow it. So they are operating based on limited legal knowledge, but the numbers are somewhat heartening that there is a large percentage of military personnel who take very seriously their duty to disobey unlawful orders. That, combined with the very subdued reaction that Trump and Hegseth received in that room full of high-level military officials a few weeks ago, does give me some hope that our military personnel, by and large, have moral and ethical compasses, at least when it comes to being turned against U.S. civilians. Obviously, I'm not talking about the numerous numerous war crimes and crimes against humanity committed around the world by the U.S. military. Let's not get carried away. And for an individual soldier to decide that an order is illegal, they likely face an uphill battle. According to the Memphis Commercial Appeal, quote, under the present deployments, the legality of the orders is dubious, but historically it's not within the ken of any individual service members to make a decision, said John W. Hall, a professor of military history at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. A lack of legal options hasn't stopped U.S. soldiers from resisting orders in the past. The U.S. has had a democratic tradition when it comes to military service, where though you pay a price for dissent, when that occurs, it's a warning to the political leadership that even the troops who are ordered to do these things will speak out, said David Courtwright, a professor at the Notre Dame Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies. Courtwright participated in that kind of resistance himself after being drafted to serve in the Vietnam War. Stationed in New York, he participated in protests in Manhattan when he was off duty and signed a petition against the war. His efforts to resist got him reassigned to a base in Texas, where all we did was clean the barracks floor continuously for months, said Courtwright. If you join in protests, you have to know or expect you could face punishment. Commanders never like it when their soldiers disagree with the mission. But back with Vietnam, we didn't care, he said. The thinking soldier is a real thing. Thank goodness for our society. We're not just robots. And it may be that with increased deployment on the ground in the U.S., the National Guard at least will get ample opportunity to exercise that judgment. And the Supreme Court seems poised to increase those opportunities tenfold. The court just agreed to hear Trump v. Illinois. This is a request off their shadow docket, so it's not a full oral argument type case, but instead an emergency order that they've been asked by the Trump regime to make a quick ruling on. The case comes out of the fight over troop deployment in Chicago. Two separate federal courts have already ruled that Trump doesn't have the authority to federalize the National Guard against the wishes of the state leadership. In this case, the federal government, on behalf of Trump, is claiming that actually Trump's decision whether to deploy troops on U.S. soil is exclusively the purview of the president, so much so that the courts actually aren't allowed to review it. According to the federal government, Trump has sole authority. Lower courts have blocked his attempts to send the troops to Chicago, in part because the government keeps citing to protests at an ICE facility just outside Chicago, claiming that 10 U.S.C. section 12406, and this should sound familiar, we've talked about it in the past, it's not the Insurrection Act, it's the law they're using as a proxy for it. They claim that that law gives Trump authority to deploy the troops to repel an invasion, suppress a rebellion, or execute the laws of the United States. And the protests outside the ICE facility in question, according to the lower courts, have never amassed a group of more than 200 people. And usually there's about 50 people there on any given day. So the regime is asking the Supreme Court to believe that 50 protesters outside one ICE facility are so impeding the federal government's ability to do its job on the ground there that their only option is to send in the troops. And the lower courts haven't bought it. Not only are they asking the Supreme Court to believe something incredibly asinine, but they're also asking the court to undermine its own power. Because in finding for Trump, they will have to at least in part agree with the regime's contention that the judiciary has no say over whether or not Trump will use the troops on U.S. soil. This case puts the court in the position to undermine the central tenet of our constitutional order, the checks and balances between three co-equal branches of government, even further than it already has. Now, this would just be a question of whether or not to uphold the temporary injunction on the case as it continues through the lower courts. And typically, the Supreme Court would uphold an injunction from a lower court in this scenario because there is a likelihood of extreme damage to rights and of abuse, such that they really shouldn't upend the entire constitutional order just off their shadow docket without full oral argument, briefing, and an extensive written opinion. That's what should happen. What will happen is hard to call, as they've proven incredibly willing to upend established norms in Trump's favor already, and they have especially been eager to do so with no written opinion using cases from its shadow docket. But again, this case poses an existential question for the courts, because it's asking the court to cut off its own legs in order to appease King Trump. Whether or not it decides to do so could have far-reaching implications. It could easily avoid the question by just saying that the stay will stand for now, and then answering the question once the case actually moves through the system and they're able to hear it properly with oral arguments and everything, and then they might decide to kneecap themselves anyway. As Ian Millhiser points out, writing for Vox, quote, needless to say, the stakes in the Illinois case are breathtaking. If Trump is allowed to use military personnel to suppress a tiny group of protesters and vandals, then it is unlikely that this court will place any meaningful limits whatsoever on his ability to deploy the U.S. military against Americans. Whether it's on the streets of sanctuary cities or at ballot boxes to intimidate voters during midterms, this case could unleash the full force of the military on U.S. citizens at Trump's whim with zero guardrails in place. I will be keeping my eye on Trump v. Illinois and all the other fuckery happening in this administration and continue to report on it for you here week after week. If you have a question you'd like me to answer in a future video, comment question in all caps along with your questions so that...
Alright, that's gonna do it for me. Take care. Fuck Israel, free Palestine, and crush Zionism forever. Take care, y'all.
Where's your fucking badge, you pigs? We go hard for Palestine. We escalate for Palestine. We fight for Palestine. We give it everything we got. We do not work with the police. We do not point people out to the police. We do not lay hands on our comrades. When we go hard for our people, you stand out the way. If you ain't with it,